Hey everybody, Eric Schramm here, and I want to spend some time talking with you about something called the 4 A's. I teach a couple different classes on conflict and workplace respect, and inevitably in that class, whether in the beginning, middle, or end, it doesn't really matter, somewhere along the line somebody asks the question, okay Eric, these are great tools, these are great tips and tricks, great strategies on managing workplace respect or asking for respect or dealing with conflict, whether in the workplace or anywhere else for that matter. But what do I do when the person doesn't want to change or doesn't want to do anything about it or seems like they don't care, they don't want to hear what I have to say, they're not interested in having a dialogue, and it just continues to happen? What do I do with that? And if you grew up like me, up until probably just a few short years ago, for me personally, I figured, there's nothing I can do. I'm stuck with this. I just have to grin and bear it, suck it up, deal with it, whatever phrases you want to use for that. And with these 4 A's, I realized I don't have to be stuck in that. There are things that I can do. I can be proactive. I can respond well in those types of situations, even if the other person doesn't want to have anything to do with it. So I want to spend a few moments today talking with you about the 4 A's. Let me give you the 4 A's first. We'll dive into what they are and then practically living them out. What does that look like? So we'll start with the first A, and that's accept. Accept is the first A. The second A is avoid. Third A is assert. Fourth A is abandon. Okay, now with these 4 A's, let's walk through now what they actually mean. So with accept means that the relationship is more important than the issue. If you go back to elementary school math, you'll remember the little greater than, less than signs, all that good stuff. Alligator eats the bigger number. Anyway, that kind of thing. At least that's how I learned it. Accept is where the relationship is greater than the issue. And again, I'll give some practical examples of this here in just a few moments, but let's continue. Avoid is where the relationship and the issue are not equal to one another. Okay? Again, I'll explain these a little bit. Assert is where the relationship is equal to the issue. And watch this subtle shift here with abandon. Abandon is where the issue is more important than the relationship. You can read my chicken scratch there. So let's walk through each of these in kind. I'll give you an example, and then we'll figure out what we can do with these from here on out. So accept. A relationship is greater than the issue. So early on in my marriage, my wife would leave the cupboards open. And I'm a midnight snack kind of guy, and so what I would do is I would wake up in the middle of the night, walk into our little galley kitchen in our first little tiny apartment there in Lake Forest, California, and I would hit my head, elbow, shoulder, knee, whatever it may be, on these different cupboards that were open, hurting myself, different noises coming out of my mouth, etc., etc. Well, frankly, as big of a deal as that was to me, from a standpoint of I am physically being harmed by this behavior, my relationship to my wife is much bigger. I care about her much more than having the cupboards left open or dealing with the pain of hitting my elbow or whatever it may be. Although I'm sure my medical bills would say otherwise. In that, right, I care more about her than I do the issue of leaving the cupboards open. And now that I have 2 little ones that like to leave cupboards open, it's too late. It's done. And the reality is I care more about my family than I do my cupboards. So what do I do now? I just wake up in the middle of the night, turn the lights on, and close all the cupboards, or before I even go to bed, I make sure all the cupboards and drawers and stuff like that are closed. Again, accept is the relationship is more important than the issue. It doesn't matter, rolls off, hey, I care more about this person than I do this particular issue. Again, we'll get into some practicals of how this works in the workplace here for us in just a few moments. Avoid. Now, avoid tends to sound like a word that we don't want to use in relationships. This isn't an avoidance of, oh my gosh, there's Bill. I don't want to get hugged by Bill. He's a hugger. I'm more of a shake hands kind of guy, so I'm going to avoid Bill at all costs. No, that's not what avoid is. Avoid is simply that the amount of time that I spend with this person, the amount of energy and effort and relationship that I have with this person, it just isn't worth having to go out and deal with this issue. I maybe work on this project with this person once a year for 2 weeks, and I can, kind of deal with it from there. Again, inside, there's no animosity, there's no friction, there's no nothing. We don't even need to worry about it. Okay, so that's the avoid piece. Next is assert. Now, assert comes into play where the relationship and the issue are equal to one another and there's some friction. In order for the relationship to continue to progress, we've got to deal with this issue. We've got to assert ourselves and have the conversation with them. Okay, so for instance, again, going back to my cupboard analogy, right? Early on, I would like, hey babe, can you close the cupboards before you or after you're done opening them or grabbing whatever it is out of them, right? And I'm asserting, hey, here's what I need, here's what I want, here's the respect that I need, or whatever it may be. And so in that, I'm asserting myself, and in that assertiveness, I'm asking for what I need. I'm broaching the conversation, no matter how hard it might be. I'm having the conversation with them so that we can deal with this friction, so that we can get this issue resolved, so the relationship can go back to where it is. So it can go back from assert to accept. Does that make sense? All right, let's talk about the fourth one, abandon. Abandon, this is where divorce happens, this is where people leave companies, this is where people get fired, things like that. And this is where the issue is more important than the relationship. So as a manager, I've had to let people go for attendance issues. And so the issue of them showing up to work on time over and over and over and over again, where I would assert, right, there's your performance management process of getting in, having the conversation, right? Sometimes accept, hey, it happens, I get it, don't worry about it, let's move on. But if it continues, this behavior continues, now we've got an issue, and now we need to deal with it. And ultimately, when we let someone go, it's the relationship that they have with me, the relationship that they have with the company, the relationship is less important than this issue at hand, right? Now, this is a last resort. This is the last place that we want to go. Now, let me give you some practicals on this. Accept. You've got a coworker who, while you don't necessarily enjoy it, listens to country music, and you're not a huge country music fan, but you're in a cube farm and you got to deal with it. Okay. Not a big deal. Every once in a while they play some Carrie Underwood or some Garth Brooks or something and you can handle it and everything's fine, right? But what if that gets to a place where it really is disrupting the workplace environment, right? Then you might want to go down to assert and say, hey, would you mind us listening to something else, or could you use headphones or something like that, right? Where it's starting to cause some friction in your relationship with that other person, in your working relationship, right? And so I need to then go and have the conversation. There are two places that we want to live. We want to live up here, and again, my lovely markers are terrible. We want to live up here in accept and assert. Accept and assert, accept and assert. If we're going to assert, hopefully get to a place where we've worked things out to where we can now accept. And we can get that relationship in a place where we can handle a lot more friction from that other person, or they can handle a lot more from us, so that we can have a great working relationship. If that doesn't happen, well, then we go back to assert. Again, there's the relationship and the issue are equal to one another, and if we're going to move forward in the relationship, got to deal with the issue, so let's have the conversation about it. Now, obviously that means that everyone has to be at the table, right? So the scenario that I brought up earlier at the top of this video was, well, what if the person doesn't want to spend time to deal with it? Or what if I've asserted and I've asserted and I've asserted and they haven't changed? Well, what do I do? Well, now you've got really two choices. One is accept. I care more about this person than this issue, or I care more about the relationship that I have with my company than this issue, or the relationship I have with my team than this person or this issue, and so I'm just going to accept. Now, this isn't a passive-aggressive, fine, I'll just accept it, but deep down inside, whenever I see that person walking past the water cooler, I cringe, or I've got some attitude in my mind. This is a true letting go, accept. If we can't go there, and the relationship and the issue are equal to one another, and we've asserted a lot and it's not working, then at that point I can do one thing, abandon. Now, what does that mean? Well, it might mean that you need to look for a different position within the organization. It might mean that you leave the team. It might mean that if it's a performance management scenario, that you talk to your manager, and there needs to be some disciplinary action on the part of the person who's not coming to the table. It also might mean that you leave the organization, right? Hopefully it doesn't come to that, obviously. We want to make sure that in all of the organizations that we work for that abandon is our last resort. But sometimes it happens. In fact, one of the big reasons why I'm in the organization that I'm in right now is because of this. Let me give you a couple examples here. So I was working for a company and was doing some great work for them, loved it, loved the team that I was a part of. We had a blast together, great relationships. And so we really lived in this place of accept. I had the person who I was reporting to also reported up to our vice president of learning. And I really didn't have much issue with anyone, and everything was fine, did my job, did it well, and kind of moved on. And so lived really kind of in this accept, avoid spot, right? Where something would happen, and not that big a deal, redo the PowerPoint, come up with some other game plan, or the relationship and the issue, I didn't work very much with this person, so not that big of a deal. Then I changed direct reports, and now I'm reporting to a higher manager. And everything was fine for a while. And then something happened, and still to this day don't quite know why, but something happened to where we started having some friction. Differences of opinion sometimes. Sometimes it's just unclear direction where I would come back and they would get offended that I would come back and get clearer direction because they guess they weren't clear enough or whatever. I don't know, but there was some friction there. And because I'm kind of a considerate kind of guy from a relational perspective, I really want to have great working relationships, very relational oriented. I hate having that kind of friction. So what do? Well, I either accept or I assert. Did a lot of accepting. Okay, fine. That's what you want me to do? Great, no problem. Hey, apologize for having to come to you, owning a lot of having to come to this person and get clarity, to get new information. But every once in a while, something would stick with me and I go, okay, we have to have a conversation about this. Hence, assert. So, what do? Go into the office. Hey, here's my issue. Here's what's going on. Can we have a conversation about it? Have a conversation. Great, fine, everything's good. I'm back up to accept. Over and over and over and over and over and over and over for probably about a year, I'm in this assert, accept cycle. We're no longer at avoid because now I report to this person, and so we can't avoid each other as much as I would have liked to, and probably the other person as well, but accept and assert. But it got to the point where things weren't changing. Having to have the same conversation over and over and over again about how to work with me, how to work with this person. They kept on changing the way that they wanted to work with me. I'm like, okay, I need some consistency here. One day I come to you, the other day I come to you for this, and you flip out. The other day I come to you and everything's cool. Like I can't handle that. It's not something that works for me. And so I continued to assert. I really enjoyed the relationships with my coworkers. It was a great organization. But I was starting to take the work home. Not just take the work home, but take the emotions of the work home. And so I would go into the office, I'd have a rough day, and what would I do? I'd come home with that rough day, and I would end up snapping at my family, or I would end up not speaking, not communicating very effectively in my own family. And as I was realizing these things and the impact that they were having throughout my world, I was realizing, okay, this is not a healthy place for me to be. Now, my boss made it really obvious of where the direction needed to go, because shortly thereafter, kind of having this realization, I was on a webinar delivering a presentation, and this person came out of their office and proceeded to yell and scream at me and at the presentation that was happening, which was nothing that I could do anything about, totally and completely out of my realm of influence. And this was in front of my colleagues, this was in front of my team, and it just didn't go well, as you would probably imagine. So what I did was I walked away after that webinar and collected my thoughts, collected some of the things I wanted to say, and I went to assert one more time. And in that assertion, I said, here's what happened, here's the impact that had, and here's my expectation going forward. Now, going forward, this person agreed, they apologized, but the damage had already been done. Team morale started to slip, all that good stuff. And so what I had once enjoyed about the organization ceased to be something that I enjoyed, and I realized that I had to go here. The issue of working in a place where there was mutual respect, where there was mutual communication as colleagues, as professionals, not just in a hierarchical structure, I had to go somewhere else. And so I quit, left the organization. And went to go find another place to be. Okay? Again, last resort, I lived in assert and accept, assert and accept, assert and accept for a long time before I made that choice. And that was my choice, right? But again, we go back to what I was talking about at the top. A lot of people tend to think that they're just stuck with it. There's nothing they can do, there's nowhere they can go, there's nothing that they have the control or power over when they're getting in a situation where there's a conflict or something like that, and both parties don't have the same motivation to show up and deal with it. And what I'm saying here with these 4 A's is that we do have the power to show up, to deal with it, whether we accept and have a true understanding, where the relationship, we care more about that person than we do the issue, and we let it go. If, again, that relationship and that issue are not equal to one another, and it's not that big of a deal, where I don't spend a whole lot of time with that person, obviously there probably wouldn't be much of a conflict if that was the case, but sometimes it happens, then we live in this avoid spot. We've got this assert part, where again, hey, I have some issues, let's sit down and work on it. Again, that means that either they're willing to at least sit down and listen to what you have to say, whether they do anything about it or not, or it's a back and forth, give and take conversation around what needs to happen moving forward. And then finally, again, last resort, abandon, where I need to leave the company, I need to leave the team, I need to leave the department, part of the organization, whatever it might be, in order to get out from this particular person, this particular relationship. Again, last resort, hopefully we don't have to worry about that, but sometimes that is an option for us. So there you go, 4 A's, accept, avoid, assert, and abandon. Hopefully that's been helpful to you, and we'll see you next time.